7 October 1944, 5:30 in the morning, Leopold Canal, Belgian-Dutch border. The German officer raises his binoculars and studies the Canadian bridgehead. There is almost nothing to study. A narrow strip of mud, shallow trenches. Broken assault boats near the canal bank. Men pressed into ground that offers almost no shelter. Water behind them. Flooded fields ahead. The Canadians have crossed the canal, but they have not escaped it. The canal remains at their backs like a wall. Every box of ammunition must cross it. Every wounded man must return across it. Every reinforcement must enter the same exposed strip, already measured by German guns. From the German position, the geometry appears simple. The Canadians are trapped. Rain and drainage water collect inside Canadian trenches. Mud clings to rifles, boots, blankets, and ammunition boxes. Men crouch low as shells pass overhead. Some have not slept. Others have slept only for seconds, waking each time artillery shakes the bank beneath them. There is no space to disappear. German observation posts can watch much of the ground. Machine guns cover the routes inland. Mortars are already registered. Artillery crews wait for daylight to reveal movement. The Canadians possess too little land for armor to maneuver. Too little depth for command posts to remain safe. Too little dry ground for the wounded. The German officer does not need hatred to believe the bridgehead will die. He needs only experience. Infantry compressed against water is vulnerable. A force without heavy support is temporary. A bridgehead that cannot expand becomes a grave. German counterattack troops begin moving forward. The first shells arrive before the morning light is complete. Mud erupts. Water rises in dark sheets. Canadian positions vanish behind smoke and spray. Men flatten themselves against the trench walls. Runners crawl between isolated groups. Stretcher bearers wait for moments when the fire weakens. The German infantry advances. This should be the end. The Canadians have already suffered during the crossing. Their positions are exposed. Their routes are narrow. Their support is delayed. They should abandon the far bank. They should attempt to escape across the canal before the next bombardment closes the route. They do not. Canadian rifles begin firing through the smoke. Machine guns answer from waterlogged positions. Artillery from the southern bank strikes the German approaches. The counterattack reaches the bridgehead, but it does not erase it. Hours later, the German officer looks again. The Canadian position is damaged, smaller in places, filled with casualties, but still alive. Another attack is prepared, then another. Each time, German officers believe the same thing. The Canadians cannot remain there. Each time, morning, smoke, and mud reveal that they have. They should have broken. They did not. The Germans are watching the canal. They are concentrating artillery on the bridgehead. They believe every Canadian committed to the operation is trapped south of them. But beyond the northern horizon, engines are being prepared beside another body of water. The Canadians are not planning only to survive the fortress. They are preparing to enter it through a second door. September 1944. Antwerp, Belgium. The city has fallen. The docks remain. Warehouses line the water. Cranes stand above one of Europe's largest ports. To Allied soldiers entering Antwerp, the prize appears complete. It is not. The port has been captured. The route to the port remains in German hands. The river Scheldt runs west from Antwerp toward the North Sea, through a long estuary bordered by islands, flooded lowlands, coastal batteries, and German defensive positions. Any ship attempting to reach Antwerp must travel through that corridor. The Germans still control it, so the docks remain silent. No Allied freighter can safely enter. No convoy can unload the mountains of fuel, ammunition, food, vehicles, replacement weapons, and men required to sustain armies advancing toward Germany. Antwerp is a port without access, a victory without use. Far to the south, Allied supply columns still travel from Normandy. Every liter of fuel must move along roads already strained by traffic. Every shell must be carried hundreds of kilometers. Trucks break down. Drivers become exhausted. Fuel is consumed simply delivering more fuel. The Allied armies have moved faster than their supply system. Germany cannot push them back to the beaches, but Germany can slow them by keeping Antwerp closed. Delay becomes strategic survival. One day without the port, then another, then another, then another. Each day buys time to rebuild defensive lines closer to Germany, to reorganize shattered formations, to prepare the approaches to the Rhine. The Breskens Pocket guards the southern side of this route. It is not one fortress in the ordinary sense. It is a region transformed into one. Canals, polders, dikes, villages, coastal guns, minefields, flooded fields. The German 64th Infantry Division occupies this ground under General Major Knut Eberding. To the north, other German positions hold South Beveland and Walcheren. Clearing Breskens alone will not open Antwerp. But leaving it in German hands guarantees the port remains useless. For the Germans, the mission is not necessarily to defeat the 1st Canadian Army. It is to deny time, make the Canadians cross every canal, clear every village, repair every road, search every dike, lose men for every kilometer. The longer the pocket survives, the longer Antwerp remains silent. The Canadians, therefore, are not attacking merely for territory. They are attacking the lock on an entire Allied supply route. The flooded bridgehead at the Leopold Canal is only the opening wound. Beyond it lies a defensive system built to turn geography into delay. The main question is no longer whether the Canadians can cross water. They already have. The question is whether they can destroy a fortress in which water, mud, and distance fight beside the defenders. October 1944. Breskens Pocket. On German maps, the position appears contained, protected. Almost complete. The Leopold Canal blocks the south. The Scheldt estuary guards the north. The North Sea closes the west. Between them lies low country shaped by water. Fields reclaimed from the sea. Drainage ditches dividing the land. Raised dikes and narrow roads standing above flooded polders. Villages built on the few pieces of ground firm enough to hold them. The Germans call the position Scheldt Fortress South. The name suggests concrete walls and a single gate. The reality is more dangerous. The entire landscape is the fortress. A tank cannot move freely across a flooded field. A truck cannot leave the raised road without sinking. Infantry advancing along a dike becomes visible from kilometers away. Destroy one bridge, and an entire column must stop. Mine one causeway, and engineers must work under observation. A farmhouse becomes a machine gun position. A church tower becomes an artillery post. A village becomes a chain of stone strongpoints connected by trenches and drainage ditches. The water limits the attackers. The roads predict where they will appear. German guns wait where geography directs the Canadians. General Major Knut Eberding commands the 64th Infantry Division inside the pocket. His formation is not a scattered collection of frightened rear area troops. It remains organized and capable of serious resistance. Its soldiers have artillery support, prepared positions, minefields, coastal weapons, knowledge of the ground. Most importantly, they possess depth. If one position falls, they can withdraw to another village, another dike, another canal, another line already prepared. This is not a defense built around one final stand. It is a defense built to consume time, hold, counterattack, delay, withdraw, repeat. Eberding's staff studies the Canadian options. The southern approach appears unavoidable. The Canadians must cross the Leopold Canal. They must establish bridges. They must bring artillery, tanks, ambulances, and supplies over exposed ground. The defenders can predict the crossing zones. They can register artillery before the attack begins. They can allow infantry onto the far bank, then crush the bridgehead before the Canadians build depth. The fortress does not need to be invincible. It needs to make every Canadian success temporary. That is why the bridgehead on 7 October appears so encouraging to German officers. The Canadians have entered the defense exactly where expected. They are compressed against water. Their tanks remain behind. Their trenches are filling. The German counterattacks are already moving. Everything in the landscape seems to favor the defenders. But the fortress rests on one assumption: that the water limits Canadian movement, that the canal is the only door, that the northern estuary is protection, not a route. The Germans are about to discover that a fortress built from water can be entered by men willing to travel through it. October 1944, Belgian-Dutch border. The men preparing to attack the Breskens Pocket are not new to water. 4 months earlier, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division had crossed the English Channel and landed on Juno Beach. There, the sea had carried them toward machine guns, mines, concrete positions, and towns defended by men who understood exactly where the Canadians had to come ashore. They had survived the beach. Then, Normandy had taken its share. Caen, Carpiquet, Verrières, Falaise, villages shattered by artillery, fields watched by hidden guns, roads blocked by wrecked vehicles and dead men. By October, the division had learned that victory rarely looked clean from the ground. It looked like replacement officers studying maps carried by men who had been killed. It looked like battalions continuing with companies reduced by casualties. It looked like familiar voices disappearing from the radio net. The Canadians had experience. That mattered. But experience is not a universal answer. A man who has crossed one beach can still drown in another kind of battlefield. Normandy had taught the division how to fight through villages, survive artillery, and coordinate infantry with tanks and guns. The Breskens Pocket removed many of those advantages. The roads were too narrow. The ground was too wet. Armor could not move where commanders wanted it. Vehicles that left firm ground risked sinking into mud. Artillery could suppress a position, but infantry still had to cross canals, climb banks, and move along exposed dikes. The Germans knew the division's reputation. They knew these were not untested troops. But they also believed the terrain had made experience less useful. Tanks had pursued German columns across France and Belgium. Inside the pocket, tanks would be tied to a few raised roads. Canadian artillery had broken positions in Normandy. Here, weather, water, and observation could complicate every fire plan. Aircraft had hunted German movement in daylight. Low cloud and rain could reduce that threat. The Canadians had fought as part of a powerful mechanized army. Now they would have to fight as boat crews, engineers, riflemen, stretcher bearers, flamethrower operators, and amphibious troops. Not one kind of soldier. Many. Major General Daniel Spry commanded the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. Under him were brigades already marked by Normandy. The 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade, the 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade, the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade. Regiments that had crossed Juno Beach now prepared to cross another defended water barrier. The Canadian Scottish Regiment, the Regina Rifle Regiment, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. Others would follow through the canal bridgehead and across the Braakman Inlet. Engineers would have to create roads where roads had been destroyed. Artillery crews would fire over men holding ground barely deep enough to contain them. Wasp flame-throwing carriers would be brought forward to project fire across the canal. Buffalo amphibious vehicles would be asked to travel through water the Germans considered part of their defense. Every machine had a purpose. Every machine also had a limit. A Wasp could create shock. It could not hold a trench. A Buffalo could cross water. It could still become trapped in mud. Artillery could suppress a strongpoint. It could not identify every defender hidden inside a dike or farmhouse. In the end, infantry would have to enter the ground and remain there. The 3rd Division had already crossed one sea. That gave it confidence. It did not guarantee survival. The Canadians were veterans of assault. The Germans intended to make them beginners again. The waterline appears again. At Juno, it marked the distance between the landing craft and the beach. At the Leopold Canal, it marks the distance between safety and a bridgehead that may not survive the day. The Germans believe the terrain has stripped away Canadian strength. On 6 October, the Canadians moved toward the canal to prove otherwise. 6 October 1944, dawn, Leopold Canal. The German defenders have watched the opposite bank through darkness. They know the attack is coming. The Canadians cannot hide the canal. They cannot move the water. They cannot make the steep banks disappear. The crossing sites have been studied, ranges measured, machine guns positioned to cover the approaches, mortars prepared to strike the bank where assault troops will gather. Artillery registered on the roads behind them. The Germans do not need to guess where the Canadians must go. The land has already decided. Then movement begins on the Canadian side. Small tracked vehicles approach the bank. Wasp flame-throwing carriers. The German soldiers know what flamethrowers can do, not only to positions, to nerves. The carriers stop within range. For one moment, the canal remains dark and still. Then fire crosses the water. Flame stretches toward the German bank. Vegetation ignites. Smoke rolls across trenches and firing positions. The far side disappears behind heat and blackened air. The psychological effect is immediate. Men who expected artillery now face fire arriving almost horizontally across the canal. Some defenders take cover. Others remain at their weapons. The flames do not destroy the defense. They disrupt it, shock it, blind parts of it for a few seconds. The Canadians need those seconds. Infantry lifts assault boats and runs toward the water. The boats are awkward, heavy, difficult to control on ground already slick with mud. Men carrying them cannot fire effectively. They move through an area the Germans have watched for days. The first machine guns recover. Rounds cut through smoke. Mortars begin landing around the bank. One boat reaches the canal. Then another. Men climb in. Others push from behind. The water that seemed narrow on a map becomes enormous under fire. Some boats drift from their intended line. Some take damage. Some men enter the water before reaching the far bank. Equipment pulls at them. Boots fill. Weapons become difficult to hold above the surface. A wounded soldier in water is heavier than one on land. A man who loses his grip may vanish beneath the weight of what he carries. The defenders fire into smoke, movement, and sound. They do not see every target. They do not need to. The canal concentrates the Canadians for them. On the far bank, the first survivors arrive. They climb. The slope is steep. Mud gives way beneath boots and hands. Rifles are pushed upward. Men pull one another toward the top. German grenades and small arms fire strike the bank. The Canadians reach the edge in small groups. Not a line, not a clean wave. Fragments. A section here. A few men farther down. An officer trying to determine who has crossed and who has not. The bridgehead begins as scattered survival. German defenders understand the weakness immediately. The Canadians who have crossed possess rifles, light machine guns, grenades, and whatever ammunition they carried. Their tanks remain behind. Their anti-tank guns remain behind. Their ambulances remain behind. Their heavier weapons cannot simply drive across water. This is the moment to counterattack. Before the Canadians dig, before they connect their positions, before engineers create a stronger route, before artillery observers establish reliable communication, Canadian troops move into shallow ground beyond the bank. They search for cover that barely exists. Some trenches are German positions just abandoned or damaged by fire. Others must be cut into wet earth. The soil fills with water almost as quickly as it is disturbed. The maple leaf patches on Canadian shoulders darken with smoke, rain, and canal mud. On one axis, the Canadian Scottish Regiment establishes a foothold. On another, the Regina Rifle Regiment fights for its own crossing. The Royal Winnipeg Rifles move to reinforce and expand the position. Two footholds begin forming. separate, narrow, vulnerable. Every meter matters. The Germans recover from the flamethrower shock. Machine guns relocate. Mortars adjust. Artillery begins striking the crossing areas. Canadian boats turn back for more men, ammunition, and wounded. Each trip repeats the same danger. The canal must be crossed again and again. A successful assault is not one journey. It is a chain. Infantry, ammunition, signals equipment, medical supplies, engineers, more infantry. One broken link can leave the men on the far bank isolated. By afternoon, the Canadians possess ground beyond the canal. But possession is not control. The bridgeheads are too shallow. The Germans still dominate much of the surrounding terrain. Canadian troops cannot move freely. The defenders can strike from prepared positions farther inland. German headquarters receives the first reports. The Canadians have crossed. Not in overwhelming strength. Not with armor. Not securely. The order is predictable. Counterattack. Push them back before night allows them to deepen the position. The first German assaults begin forming. Canadian soldiers lie in wet trenches and listen to movement beyond the smoke. They have crossed the water. Now they must survive on the wrong side of it. The flames that opened the attack are fading. The smoke is thinning. The defenders can see the bridgehead more clearly. And what they see still looks small enough to kill. 6 October, 1944. Night. Leopold Canal bridgehead. Darkness does not protect the Canadians. It makes the battlefield harder to understand. The bridgehead exists as fragments. A shallow trench. A damaged farmhouse. A section of dike. A few men holding ground they reached separately and now struggle to connect. Beyond them, German infantry moves through familiar terrain. Behind them, the canal blocks retreat, reinforcement, and evacuation. The first counterattack comes through darkness. German artillery strikes before the infantry arrives. Shells fall across ground too narrow to absorb them. There is almost no safe rear area. A position behind the front may be only a few dozen meters from the men firing forward. Command posts shake. Medical points fill. Telephone lines break. Radio messages become incomplete or disappear beneath static. Then German infantry reaches the Canadian positions. The defenders know what must be done. Separate the Canadian groups. Reach the canal bank. Destroy the boats. Force survivors into the water. The Germans do not need to recapture every trench. They need to break the bridgehead's connection to itself. Canadian riflemen fire from mud and shallow cover. Machine guns answer until belts run low or mechanisms clog. Grenades pass through darkness. Men identify friend and enemy by movement, outline, and shouted warning. The battlefield narrows again. Not a campaign, not a fortress. A few meters of wet ground. A weapon that still works. A wounded man blocking part of a trench because there is nowhere else to place him. The counterattack reaches Canadian positions. Some ground is lost. Some groups fall back. Others remain where they are because retreat would expose them to fire from both front and rear. The Germans believe the pressure is working. The bridgehead is shrinking. The Canadians are taking casualties. Another bombardment begins. They should withdraw. They do not. The water becomes its own enemy. Trenches fill. Walls collapse. A man who kneels may sink deeper than expected. Ammunition boxes must be raised above the wet ground. Rifles and machine guns require constant attention. Mud enters actions, magazines and barrels. Blankets are soaked. Uniforms remain cold against skin. There is no true rest. A soldier closes his eyes and wakes when a shell lands, when someone steps on him, or when water reaches farther up his body. The canal remains behind them. Boats cross under darkness carrying ammunition and reinforcements, then return with wounded. Stretcher bearers work near the bank, where artillery already knows movement must concentrate. Some wounded men wait, because there are not enough boats. Others cannot be moved during the heaviest fire. The distance to safety may be less than 100 meters. Under observation, it becomes immeasurable. Canadian engineers attempt to improve the crossing. They need routes strong enough for heavier weapons, vehicles, and supplies. But engineering equipment must approach through shell fire. Bridging work reveals itself through noise and movement. German artillery searches for it. The defenders understand that time is critical. If Canadian engineers establish reliable crossings, the bridgehead gains depth. If armor and anti-tank weapons arrive, counterattacks become more dangerous. The Canadians must be destroyed before the bridge becomes real. 7 October. Another German counterattack. The artillery falls first. Canadian positions disappear behind smoke and water. German infantry advances through terrain it knows better. Some defenders have survived the opening flamethrower assault. They have watched Canadians climb the canal bank. Now they see those same men trapped in flooded positions. The logic remains powerful. The Canadians cannot stay. Yet they stay. Canadian artillery fires from the southern side. Observers on the far bank attempt to direct shells onto German assembly areas and approaches. Communication is imperfect. The targets are close to Canadian troops. Every correction matters. Too short, and Canadian positions are struck. Too long, and German infantry continues forward. Shells land. The counterattack slows. Canadian riflemen remain in the mud. Morning arrives. The bridgehead is still there. Smaller in places. Damaged. But alive. German officers prepare another assault. They have seen formations collapse under less pressure. They know a bridgehead has limits. Men become exhausted. Ammunition runs out. Officers are killed. Communications fail. Fear spreads. At some point, the force should stop behaving as a unit and become individuals trying to escape. The Canadians approach that point. They do not cross it. Not because every man is fearless. Some shake. Some become confused. Some can no longer respond as quickly as before. Battle exhaustion is not weakness. It is the mind and body reaching the edge of what they can absorb. Yet enough men remain in position. Enough ammunition arrives. Enough officers and non-commissioned officers restore control. Enough artillery lands in the right place. The bridgehead survives another day. 8 October. The Germans attack again. The canal bank is marked by wrecked boats and churned earth. Canadian trenches are barely trenches now. They are holes filled with water, ammunition, men, and the remains of the previous attacks. The defenders believe one more effort may finish it. They press forward. The Canadians give ground in places. Then stop. Counterfire builds. German movement slows. Another assault fails to erase the foothold. For 3 days, the bridgehead exists on the edge of destruction. For 3 days, German officers see evidence that it should collapse. For 3 days, it remains. They should have broken. They did not. But survival alone cannot destroy Scheldt Fortress South. The Canadians cannot spend weeks clinging to a canal bank. The bridgehead must expand. The German defense must be forced to look somewhere else. While the defenders concentrate on the Leopold Canal, Canadian troops gather near the Braakman Inlet. Buffalo amphibious vehicles wait in darkness. Engines are checked. Routes studied. Men climb aboard with rifles, ammunition, and the knowledge that water will once again carry them toward an enemy shore. The Germans believe the canal is the only door. The Canadians are about to enter through the sea. Night of 8 October 1944. Braakman Inlet. The water is black. Wind moves across the surface in cold sheets. Along the southern shore, Canadian troops climb into Buffalo amphibious vehicles. The machines are large, tracked, and awkward. Built to move through water, then crawl onto land. Inside them, infantry sits close together beneath the smell of fuel, wet clothing, oil, and metal. Weapons are held between knees. Ammunition is checked again, then checked once more. No one mistakes the operation for safety. A buffalo can float. It can also sink. It can lose direction in darkness. It can strike mud too deep to cross. It can emerge from the water directly beneath a German gun. The soldiers aboard know that they are approaching a defended coast with almost no visibility. They know the landing points may be difficult to identify. They know tides and mud may scatter the assault before the enemy fires. Still, engines begin turning over, one after another, low, heavy, mechanical. The Germans are watching the Leopold Canal. Their artillery remains focused on the bridgehead. Their infantry continues preparing counterattacks against Canadians trapped on the far bank. The canal battle has consumed attention. That is exactly what the Canadians need. The buffaloes enter the inlet. Tracks disappear beneath the waterline. The vehicles move forward slowly, riding lower than boats and making sounds no German sentry expects to hear approaching from the estuary. Inside each vehicle, there is little to see. Only darkness. Occasional spray. The outline of another buffalo appearing, then vanishing. Men cannot judge distance by landmarks. They feel changes in engine noise, the impact of waves, the vehicle turning, the sudden reduction in speed when mud begins pulling against the tracks. Somewhere ahead is the German-held shore. Somewhere behind, the starting point is already invisible. The Canadians have committed themselves to the water. A German sentry hears engines beyond the dike. At first, the sound seems distant. Possibly naval traffic. Possibly vehicles moving along another road. The fortress is bounded by water. Engines belong beyond it. Then the noise grows louder, not passing from one side to another. Approaching. The sentry watches the darkness. Shapes begin moving across the surface. Too low to be ships. Too broad to be ordinary assault boats. They come closer. Tracks strike shallow mud. The first buffalo begins climbing out of the inlet. The German sentry understands only part of what he is seeing. Armored vehicles are emerging from the water. Canadian infantry is inside them. The fortress has not been penetrated by a small patrol. An assault force is arriving from the direction German planning treated as protection. The first Canadian vehicles reach land. Their tracks bite into mud. Some move forward. Others struggle. The polders do not suddenly become firm because the water has ended. Mud grips the vehicles. Engines strain. Tracks spin. Infantry climbs out and steps into waterlogged ground. Boots sink. Men move away from the vehicles before German fire can concentrate on them. At some landing points, resistance is initially limited. At others, German weapons begin firing as the surprise fades. Machine gun rounds strike mud and vehicle armor. Mortars search the shoreline. Canadian soldiers scatter toward dikes, farm buildings, and any rise offering cover. The landing begins breaking into separate fights. A buffalo immobilized. A platoon moving toward the wrong dike. A radio failing to connect with supporting units. A German position firing from ground that appeared empty in darkness. Surprise has opened the door. It has not cleared the room. Canadian troops move inland as quickly as the terrain allows. More vehicles arrive behind them. More infantry dismounts. German telephone lines carry reports toward headquarters. Canadians on the northern side of the pocket. Canadian amphibious vehicles inside the estuary defense. Canadian infantry moving near the polders. The first reports appear contradictory. The main Canadian assault is still at the Leopold Canal. German forces are still fighting there. Yet another Canadian force is now landing from the north. The map changes in a single night. Not because the canal bridgehead has expanded, because a second bridgehead has appeared. The waterline changes meaning. At the Leopold Canal, it trapped Canadians against the bank. At the Braakman Inlet, it carried them behind the expected direction of attack. The Germans had treated water as a wall. The Canadians have used it as a road. But the northern bridgehead remains fragile. The buffaloes are struggling in mud. Heavy weapons are limited. The infantry is scattered across unfamiliar ground. German reserves are already turning toward them. The machines have brought the Canadians inside. Now the Germans will try to push them back into the water. 9 October 1944. Dawn. Paulinapolder. Morning reveals what darkness concealed. Buffalo vehicles sit in mud along the landing area. Some have moved inland. Others remain trapped near the water. Their tracks have carved deep channels through the wet ground. Canadian infantry occupies scattered positions along dikes, farm buildings, and raised strips of earth. The bridgehead exists. But it is not secure. German officers study the reports. The northern landing is dangerous. It is also vulnerable. The Canadians possess surprise, but not yet depth. Their vehicles are restricted. Their artillery remains largely beyond the water. Their infantry must fight across narrow routes where one strong point can block movement. The German response is immediate. Counterattack before the landing becomes permanent. Strike the Canadians while their units are still disorganized. Drive them back toward the inlet. Destroy the vehicles on the shore. Close the second door. German artillery begins searching the landing zones. Shells strike dike roads and open ground. Mud, water, and metal rise together. A buffalo near the shoreline becomes a fixed target once it stops moving. Men shelter beside tracks or crawl toward firmer ground. The machines that seemed unnatural and threatening during the night now appear heavy and exposed in daylight. A buffalo can cross water. It cannot dominate a battlefield by itself. The infantry must hold. German troops move toward Canadian positions around the Paulinapolder area and nearby approaches. They use the ground well. Dikes hide movement. Farm buildings provide firing positions. Artillery forces Canadians to remain low while assault groups close the distance. The Germans believe the landing can still be reduced to an isolated pocket. A raid. A mistake. A force too far from support. Canadian troops answer from ditches, buildings, and the reverse sides of embankments. Some units have only limited heavy weapons. Communication remains difficult. The ground prevents commanders from seeing the full fight. A platoon may hold one dike without knowing whether the position beside it remains Canadian. A runner may travel hundreds of meters through exposed mud to carry a message a radio cannot send. The fighting becomes close. Confused. Local. Not a clean front line. A series of positions separated by water, fields, and German fire. The German counterattack presses toward the landing area. For a moment, the logic appears to favor the defenders again. Canadian vehicles are immobilized. Infantry is spread thin. The water behind them offers no easy retreat. They should be contained. Then reinforcements begin arriving. More buffaloes cross. Canadian artillery from supporting positions searches for German assembly areas. Smoke drifts across exposed routes. Infantry commanders reorganize scattered groups into a more coherent defense. The northern bridgehead does not disappear. It thickens. Slowly. Painfully. The Germans continue attacking. They inflict casualties. They force local withdrawals. They keep the Canadians from moving freely. But every hour that passes allows more men, ammunition, radios, and support to enter the foothold. The raid becomes a bridgehead. The bridgehead becomes a front. German officers recognize the shift. The Canadian force is not preparing to leave. It is preparing to expand. Aberdeen now faces pressure from two directions. At the Leopold Canal, the original bridgehead still survives. At the Braakman Inlet, the second assault is growing. The defensive system was built to focus strength against one crossing. Now reserves must move north. Artillery must divide attention. Roads must carry German troops between threatened sectors. The fortress still exists. But it no longer controls the direction of battle. The Canadians have forced it to look both ways. Ahead of the northern bridgehead lies Biervliet. If the Germans hold it, the amphibious force may remain trapped near the coast. If the Canadians take it, the landing will become a permanent route into the center of the pocket. October 1944. Approaches to Biervliet. The Canadians have entered the pocket from two directions. That does not mean the two forces can reach each other. Between them lies flooded country, dikes, drainage canals, farm buildings, narrow roads watched by German guns. The northern bridgehead remains dependent on routes that barely exist. Buffalo vehicles can bring men across the water. They cannot carry an army through every field. The Canadians must seize firm ground. Biervliet becomes the key. The town stands near routes connecting the amphibious landing area with the interior of the pocket. If the Germans hold it, they can continue isolating the northern force. If it falls, Canadian reinforcements and supplies can move more effectively inland. The fight is no longer about surprise. It is about conversion. Turning a landing into an advance. Turning an advance into a front. Turning two bridgeheads into one battlefield. German defenders prepare the approaches. The roads and dikes favor them. Canadian infantry moving along raised ground can be seen. The flooded fields on either side restrict maneuver. A soldier stepping off the dike may sink into water and mud. A vehicle leaving the road may become useless. The terrain channels the Canadians toward strongpoints. Farmhouses become bunkers. Tree lines conceal machine guns. A crossroads becomes an artillery target. The Germans do not need enormous forces to delay movement. A few determined defenders in the correct position can hold an entire route. Canadian troops advance in narrow files. Artillery fires ahead of them. Infantry crosses open sections quickly, then drops behind embankments. Engineers examine culverts, bridges, and road surfaces. Every intact section of dike matters. Every damaged crossing creates another pause under fire. Around Drievegen and nearby positions, fighting produces deadlock and confusion. The Germans counterattack. The Canadians respond. Ground changes hands. Then changes again. The northern bridgehead has survived, but survival alone still does not break the pocket. The Canadians need Biervliet. The attack toward the town continues. German artillery strikes approach roads. Canadian guns answer. Infantry moves against farm positions and defensive points protecting the route. The fighting is slow because the landscape refuses speed. No sweeping armored movement. No broad encirclement. Only men advancing along strips of firm ground while water remains on both sides. This is where Canadian adaptation becomes visible. At the canal, infantry crossed in boats. At the inlet, it arrived in amphibious vehicles. Now it must fight conventionally in terrain that punishes conventional movement. Artillery suppresses strongpoints. Infantry works along dikes. Engineers restore routes. Vehicles follow only where the ground permits. Each arm supports the others because none can operate freely alone. The Germans continue resisting. They are not passive defenders waiting to be surrounded. They understand that Biervliet controls access. Counterattacks strike Canadian positions. Machine guns delay movement from farm buildings and raised ground. Casualties increase. Local civilians remain trapped inside a landscape, being transformed into a battlefield. Homes become positions. Fields become killing grounds. Villages become objectives written into military orders. The cost belongs to soldiers and civilians alike. Eventually, Canadian forces secure Biervliet after hard fighting. The capture changes the geometry of the operation. Routes begin opening. The northern force gains space. Reinforcements and supplies can move more effectively. The 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade enters or supports the expanding battle as the operation develops. The Canadians advancing from the canal and those pushing inland from the Braakman begin approaching one another. German officers see the danger. The two bridgeheads are no longer separate problems. They are becoming one front. The fortress perimeter has been penetrated from south and north. The defensive system has not collapsed. But it has been split. Eberding's map changes again. The outer boundary is gone. German units are now defending sectors inside the pocket, rather than a secure perimeter around it. Breskens remains ahead. Coastal guns remain active. Villages and fortified positions still stand between the Canadians and the western edge. But the water no longer keeps the Canadians outside. They are inside the fortress now. And every road they capture makes the map smaller. Late October 1944. Approaches to Breskens, Netherlands. The town that gives the pocket its name lies ahead. Breskens, a port on the southern bank of the Scheldt. A place of docks, seawalls, coastal positions, damaged streets, and German guns. By now, the Canadians have forced their way across the Leopold Canal. They have survived the bridgehead that should have disappeared. They have crossed the Braakman Inlet in Buffalo amphibious vehicles. They have pushed through Biervliet and split the German defensive perimeter. The fortress is open, but it is not defeated. The Germans have lost the outer wall. They still possess the rooms inside. From German positions, the Canadian advance appears slow. That is true. It is also relentless. The flooded fields prevent a rapid armored breakthrough. Roads remain narrow. Mines and demolitions continue to slow engineers. Artillery shells strike raised routes where infantry, vehicles, and supplies have no alternative path. The Germans still possess strongpoints. They still possess coastal weapons. They still possess the ability to make every village expensive. The Canadians do not move through an empty pocket. They move through a defense that is being compressed. Breskens has already suffered heavily. Bombardment has damaged homes, streets, harbor facilities, and defensive positions. Dutch civilians have endured occupation, evacuation, artillery, and aerial attack. For them, liberation does not arrive as a clean flag raised over an undamaged town. It arrives through ruins, through fire, through soldiers fighting beside houses that once held ordinary lives. Canadian troops approach with armor where the roads permit it. Where tanks cannot move, infantry goes forward. German guns watch the likely routes. The port and seawall create natural lines of defense. Concrete and earth positions guard the approaches. A tank on a narrow road cannot easily turn away from an anti-tank gun. Infantry moving beside it may have only a ditch or embankment for protection. The defenders know this. They have spent weeks using geography to make Allied strength difficult to apply. They will do it again at Breskens. Canadian tanks intended to support the assault suffer losses or encounter serious resistance before the infantry attack develops. The original plan becomes less certain. Commanders must decide whether to delay, reorganize, or send infantry forward with less armored support than expected. This is the kind of decision that defines the pocket, not whether an attack will be difficult. Every attack is difficult. The decision is how much support can be lost before the attack becomes impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Roger Rowley and the Highland Light Infantry of Canada are associated with the operation to seize Breskens and its harbor approaches. The attack moves along constrained ground. Infantry uses the seawall, roads, and remaining cover. Artillery fires ahead. The town absorbs another layer of destruction. German defenders fire from prepared positions and withdraw when Canadian pressure becomes too great. Some stay too long and are killed or captured. Others escape toward the next defensive line. The Canadians enter the harbor area. Breskens falls. The name on the operation map changes color. Canadian troops occupy the port. The fortress has lost the town that gave it its Allied name. This should feel like the ending. It is not. German artillery and coastal positions remain farther west. Fort Frederick Hendrik and other fortified points continue resisting. Oostburg remains contested. Zuidzande, Kadzand, Knokke, Zeebrugge. The 64th Infantry Division still possesses men, weapons, and orders. Its defense has not depended on Breskens alone. It depends on delay. Every position held for another day continues denying the Scheldt. Every road destroyed forces Canadian engineers to stop. Every village defended costs infantry. German troops withdraw from Breskens into a smaller pocket. The same water that once protected their flanks now limits their escape. To the north, the Scheldt. To the west, the sea. To the east and south, Canadian formations pushing inward. Eberding studies the reports. The perimeter that once enclosed a fortress has fractured. The Leopold Canal is behind the Canadians. The Braakman route is operating. Biervliet is lost. Breskens is falling, or has fallen. The map still contains German territory. But less than yesterday. The fortress is becoming a trap, one town at a time. The Canadians have not flooded the Germans out. They have done something slower, more exhausting, more costly. They have crossed every flooded barrier and remained on the other side. They have brought engineers behind infantry, artillery behind engineers, vehicles behind artillery, then repeated the process. The German defense continues. Not because victory remains likely, because delay still has military value, because orders still arrive, because formations do not always surrender when their strategic purpose is disappearing. Breskens was not the end. It was the moment the defenders could look at the shrinking map and understand that there would be no new outer line. Only the next village, the next dike, the next withdrawal, until there was nowhere left to go. Late October 1944, German Divisional Headquarters, Breskens Pocket. The map is becoming difficult to use, not because the roads are unclear, because too many are gone. A bridge destroyed, a dike cut by shell fire, a village lost, a route covered by Canadian artillery, a battalion no longer answering. Each report removes another option. General Major Knut Eberding's 64th Infantry Division is still fighting. Its soldiers remain dangerous. Its artillery still fires. Its small units still know how to use ditches, farmhouses, canals, and villages to delay the Canadians. But the division no longer controls a fortress perimeter. It controls fragments, isolated positions connected by roads that become less reliable every day. The Canadians continue west. Not quickly. The ground refuses speed. Engineers clear mines and inspect bridges. Infantry moves through ruined communities. Artillery fires against identified strongpoints. Armor follows the roads where those roads still exist. Every formation depends on the one behind it. Infantry cannot advance far without ammunition. Artillery cannot support what observers cannot see. Tanks cannot leave the firm road. Engineers cannot work if the infantry has not secured the banks and buildings around them. The battle remains, combined arms reduced to narrow strips of land. The Germans understand those dependencies. They target engineers. They shell crossroads. They defend villages that control the few usable routes. They counterattack where Canadian units become separated. The defense continues to impose casualties. The 64th Division is losing. It is not weak. That distinction matters. Oostburg becomes another center of resistance. The town and surrounding routes matter because they connect the remaining German positions. Canadian formations close in. Artillery strikes. Buildings burn. Infantry enters streets already shattered by weeks of war. German soldiers fight from houses, roadblocks, and prepared points. Some positions are bypassed and isolated. Others must be attacked directly. The Canadians suffer losses. The Germans suffer more. Civilians who remain endure another battle moving through their community. Oostburg falls after hard fighting. The map shrinks again. Zuidzande lies next. Then Cadzand. The names are smaller than Antwerp. Smaller than Breskens. But each one controls roads, dikes, and retreat routes. Each can become a fortress for a day. Each day still matters. German soldiers move westward through rain and mud. Some carry ammunition by hand because vehicles cannot pass. Some units arrive without full communication with divisional headquarters. Wounded men fill improvised aid stations. Prisoners begin moving in larger groups toward Canadian lines. The defense is losing cohesion. Not everywhere at once. A company may still fight effectively while the battalion beside it has disappeared. An artillery battery may continue firing after the infantry it supported has withdrawn. A commander may receive orders for a route already occupied by Canadians. The fortress is not collapsing like a wall. It is dissolving like ground beneath floodwater, one connection at a time. Canadian engineers continue opening routes. Minefields are marked and cleared. Damaged crossings are repaired. Supply vehicles move forward. Then artillery. Then ambulances. Then more infantry. The German method has always been to trade ground for time. Now there is less ground to trade. Eberding's staff receives reports from the remaining sectors. Zuidzande under pressure. Kadzan threatened. Positions near the coast increasingly isolated. Naki and Zeebrugge becoming the final limits of German-controlled territory south of the Scheldt. The waterline has completed its transformation. At the beginning, it protected the Germans. The Leopold Canal forced the Canadians into assault boats. The Braakman Inlet appeared to secure the northern flank. Flooded polders denied Canadian armor freedom. Now the same water blocks German movement. A unit pushed against the estuary cannot withdraw north. A force compressed against the sea cannot create another defensive depth. The fortress once used water to determine where the Canadians could attack. Now the Canadians determine how little land the Germans have left. The defenders continue fighting. Some because of orders. Some because surrender remains dangerous or unthinkable. Some because they believe another line may hold. Some because the men beside them remain in position. War rarely gives every soldier the same reason. There is no need to portray them all as fanatics. There is no need to portray them all as unwilling victims. They are soldiers of Nazi Germany defending occupied territory against an Allied army. Their tactical skill is real. So is the regime and war they serve. The Canadians continue advancing, not as executioners, not as invincible liberators untouched by fear, as exhausted infantrymen crossing another flooded field, as engineers approaching another suspected mine, as stretcher-bearers moving toward another wounded man, as artillery crews firing another concentration onto another village. The maple leaf patches are nearly hidden beneath rain and mud. The buffalo tracks behind them fill slowly with water. Zuidzande falls. Kadzand follows after further resistance. Fortified positions continue to delay the Canadians, but none can restore the lost perimeter. German troops surrender in increasing numbers. Others are killed or wounded. Some continue withdrawing toward the final coastal positions. Command becomes harder. Movement becomes harder. Supply becomes harder. The map becomes smaller. Near Knokke and Zeebrugge, the remaining German resistance is pressed against the western end of the pocket. The Canadians have crossed from canal to estuary. From estuary to polders. From polders to towns. The operation that began with men carrying boats into fire now approaches its end. By 3 November 1944, organized German resistance south of the Scheldt is eliminated. Thousands of German soldiers have been killed, wounded, or captured. The 64th Infantry Division ceases to function as an organized formation inside the pocket. Its defensive mission has delayed the Canadians for weeks. It has inflicted more than 2,000 Canadian casualties during Operation Switchback. It has also been consumed by that mission. Canadian intelligence later reportedly describes the 64th as the best infantry division the 1st Canadian Army had yet encountered. That assessment matters. The Canadians do not need the Germans to have been weak. The achievement becomes clearer when the defense is understood honestly. The fortress was held by disciplined troops. It used excellent ground. It counterattacked effectively. It nearly destroyed the 1st Canadian bridgehead. It recovered from the Braakman surprise. It continued fighting after Breskens fell. And still, the map disappeared. Not in one charge. Not through one commander's dramatic surrender. Through sustained pressure. Engineering. Artillery. Amphibious movement. Infantry advancing along roads barely wider than the vehicles using them. One dike. one farmhouse, one ruined village at a time. The fortress had nowhere left to shrink. 3 November 1944, Western Netherlands. The guns begin to fall silent south of the Scheldt. Not all at once. A final burst from one position, a scattered shot from another, then less. The remaining German soldiers emerge from bunkers, farm buildings, trenches, and ruined towns. Weapons are placed on wet ground. Columns of prisoners begin moving eastward under Canadian guard. The Breskens Pocket is gone. The water remains. It fills shell holes. It lies inside abandoned trenches. It reflects broken buildings and damaged trees. It covers fields that once fed families. It gathers around wrecked vehicles that will never move again. The battlefield has returned to its central image, the waterline. At first, it kept the Canadians out. At the Leopold Canal, men carried assault boats toward machine guns because there was no dry route forward. On the far bank, water filled their trenches and pressed them against the place they had crossed. For 3 days, the Germans expected that water to help destroy them. They should have broken. They did not. At the Braakman Inlet, the meaning changed. Buffalo engines moved through darkness. Tracks disappeared beneath the surface. Canadian infantry approached from the direction German officers believed the water protected. The fortress had another door. At the end, the water changed again. It no longer protected German movement. It limited it. The Scheldt to the north, the sea to the west, flooded fields between shrinking positions. The barrier became confinement. First, the water kept the Canadians out. Then it trapped them inside the bridgehead. Finally, it trapped the Germans inside the pocket. The thumbnail may say, Canada flooded them out. The historical truth is harder. The Canadians did not create most of the floodwater covering the battlefield. They entered it. They crossed it. They slept inside it. They bled into it. They brought ammunition through it. They carried wounded men back across it. They forced machines through mud designed by geography and war to stop machines. They did not win because the water disappeared. They won because every barrier became a problem to be solved. The canal required assault boats and flame. The bridgehead required artillery, engineers, and men willing to remain in flooded trenches. The estuary required buffalo vehicles and night navigation. The polders required infantry moving along exposed dikes. The towns required close fighting. The final positions required patience after any easier army might have declared the main objective complete. The cost was severe. More than 2,000 Canadian casualties were suffered during the clearing of the Breskens Pocket. Some of those men had landed at Juno Beach. Some had survived Normandy. Some had crossed France and Belgium, only to die beside a Dutch canal or flooded field. German soldiers were killed, wounded, and captured in large numbers. The 64th Infantry Division was destroyed as an organized formation. Dutch and Belgian civilians returned to towns damaged by artillery, bombing, flooding, occupation, and weeks of close combat. Liberation came. It came through devastation. The victory did not immediately place Allied ships beside Antwerp's docks. The Breskens Pocket was only one part of the Scheldt campaign. South Beveland still had to be cleared. Walcheren still had to be attacked. The estuary still contained mines. Mine-clearing vessels still had to open the shipping channel. Only later in November would Allied shipping finally reach Antwerp. That final arrival would be measured in cargo, fuel, ammunition, vehicles, food, replacement equipment. But the route had first been measured in casualties. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division's reputation from the operation was later associated with amphibious fighting and the reported nickname Water Rats. The nickname risks making the campaign sound adventurous. It was not. It was cold water inside a trench, mud inside a rifle, a boat crossing under fire, a buffalo unable to move, a dike road covered by artillery, a farmhouse containing men who would not leave until forced, a wounded soldier waiting for a route back across the canal. This was not one fortress stormed in one cinematic attack. It was an entire landscape dismantled. The Germans trusted the canal. The Canadians crossed it. They trusted the estuary. The Canadians traveled through it. They trusted the flooded ground. The Canadians advanced across the few pieces of land that remained. They trusted depth. The Canadians removed it one town at a time. The Breskens Pocket did not fall in one moment. It disappeared. One bridgehead, one dike, one road, one ruined village at a time. The Canadians did not flood the Germans out. They entered the flood, crossed it, and removed every position that believed water made